Hello, thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell, for the latest of my deep dive videos. But this one is a particularly important one, if I say so myself. This is my world astrology forecast for year 2022, based on the solar return, the planetary positions as we enter into the new year, which provide a backdrop for the whole year. Now obviously we've got some big stuff coming in 22. We've got the move of the North Node into the sign of Taurus on the 18th of January. We've got Mars in Gemini for 5 months and going through a big retrograde. We've of course got Venus conjunct Pluto at the start of the year, but that aspect does repeat itself as we go into the year. And then in terms of the eclipse series, that moves firmly into the polarities between the signs of Taurus and Scorpio, which suggests we're going to have a much more earthly experience. Over the last few years, as the eclipse series has gone between the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius, the big issue has been information. You know, the distortion of information, the fight for different points of view, the different viewpoints that people have taken in a very strident way, but also the restriction on movement, which has been so fundamental as part of the COVID experience. So as we come into this new year, we are creating a new potential, and that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. Now, once I've shared the natal chart wheel and gone into the fixed star that dominates on this particular event, the position of the moon, critical, not just the sun, and the stellium of energy in Capricorn, once I've done that, I'm going to give an individual forecast for each of the 12 zodiac signs. So you can watch these from the perspective of your sun sign or your ascendant. It's your choice, but please stay with me for that. Now, if you are new to my channel, I would be honoured if you would subscribe to me. You can do this by clicking or tapping on the bell notification symbol. This just means every time I drop a video, you get an alert. And also, I've been writing daily written horoscopes for over 25 years. My work's featured in Britain's most read daily newspaper, The Metro, where I've been the astrologer for 12 years, and also some of the biggest platforms, digital platforms across the world. If you'd like to get yours fired to your device each morning, totally free of charge, please see the link beneath this video. And of course, with year 2022 upon us, you may wish to understand what the year holds for you in terms of your personal astrology. So based on your time, date and place of birth, you can all do your forecast, get a character analysis, and get the rest of 21 free if you're ordering in the remainder of year 21, plus 30% off. You can see the link for this beneath this video. This gives you a wonderful opportunity to understand how the machinations of the timing of your birth are evolving in your life in the here and now. This will give you searing insights for the month ahead above your zodiac forecast. So here we are on the screen now. You can see the wheel. Now the wheel in my situation is based on Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, Universal Central Time, and so that gives us an ascendant at midnight of 7 degrees in Libra. Libra energy is very much about relating, but also you can see on the screen that we have a clustering of energy in the sign of Capricorn. Now of course the sun is always in this location at the turn of the year, and it means that the sun at 10 degrees 31 is just into the second decan of Capricorn. So a Venusian energy, if you like, because the next earth sign in the triplicity is Taurus, and that's governed by Venus. So this sun has the potential to be very much to do with money, if we think about it, because Venus isn't just about relating, even though it is also the ruler of the ascendant, Libra, but it can be about money, it can be about the physical plane. So Capricorn energy is about stability, traditionality, about patience, working towards things in a very persistent way. But you can also see that we have Venus itself in the sign of Capricorn. Now, of course, it's going through a very long transit through the sign of Capricorn, which is going to go on through to the 6th of March. And the reason for this is that Venus went into a retrograde on the 19th of December. But for the whole of December, it has been allied with Pluto, and it is on this solar return. So we're talking about resources for this new year, or status or standing, very much Capricorn energies. But having Venus there, that also points towards the money again, but it also points towards relationships. But having Venus alongside Pluto, Pluto's the planet of power, but it's also the planet of transformation. So in some situations, I think it's possible that there could be some kind of revival in certain areas of our lives to do with relationships, as long as the power part of the element of the relationship is working well. So if there are any relationships that aren't working so well, where there's a disparity between someone wanting something and giving something, it's going to be a critical theme of this year. And it may mean quite a few people will have to consider giving up some more material elements of their situation in order to gain the spiritual uplift that is possible if we can step beyond the desire for that physical security. Now, Mercury is also, you can see, in the sign of Capricorn too. Mercury here is brilliant for business, but it is pretty close to Pluto, and that can lead to very trenchant opinions. So people who have Pluto and Mercury aspects in their natal chart can be quite opinionated, and they don't hold back from saying how they feel. So I think on this particular event chart, based on Greenwich Mean Time, it means that all that energy in Capricorn is in the 4th house, very much to do with security. So I think it's possible, with Pluto being the ruler of the underworld, that anybody who's been obtaining finance or positions of authority through dishonesty, through distorting their credentials, through claiming to be representing situations in a positive way when there's been a much more selfish agenda, the chances of them being revealed this year are very high. So expect quite a few stories in 2022 about corruption. Also, in those personal relationships, disparity around the power of a relationship. So any relationship that's based on ownership could go through a change. It could crumble. Any relationship that's based on an honest sharing of resources and affections can thrive. Absolutely. Now, the other thing I want you to look at in this solar return is that the moon is 15 degrees in the sign of Sagittarius. Now, Sagittarius is a very free-moving, expansive, mutable energy, brilliant for flexing, whereas the sign of Capricorn is much more stable. It is a cardinal sign, so it's very much about leadership, but the sign of Sagittarius, where the moon is, suggests in terms of our emotions, we will not want to be trapped. We want to be free spirits. And also this moon position is in the 3rd house, very much to do with how we think and articulate our ideas. The problem with the moon in the 3rd house is that we can think our thoughts are actually our feelings. So we're going to have to work hard this year to make sure that we don't think our thoughts are our feelings. So we have to dive a little bit deeper. But you can see that Mars is alongside the position of the moon, and that can be quite volatile. Now, both are actually pinned and secured in a positive way by Saturn in Aquarius. So that's providing some anchorage, because Mars on top of the moon in Sagittarius, very much to do with resisting any kind of restriction whatsoever, and especially in the 3rd house. So one of the ways that we can make this work for ourselves, I think, is to try and get more physically active. COVID has meant that we've all spent a lot of time locked indoors, And that's obviously been frustrating. Sometimes it's not been through choice, but maybe in some ways we've become too accustomed to being home-based. So I think that Moon-Mars conjunction pushes us to get more physically active, to get moving around more in a more explosive way. So that could be, for example, when we go for a walk, walking between the lampposts really, really quickly to get our cardiovascular system working that much quicker. It could be cycling, which is very intense and quick, or swimming. These are very, very good things. It doesn't have to be running if you're someone who doesn't want to do something that's more demanding. But of course, the third house is very much about how we think. And having Mars there means that there's going to be lots of lively discussions this year. So that's not a lot different from the last year we've been through. But I think there could be a lot more interactivity between our communities this year. And that's what this chart is really suggesting. So obviously, you know, in Britain we had Clap for Carers in the early days of COVID. And then we've seen various opportunities to build up other community interfaces because people perhaps have got to know neighbours more through that. And that theme can continue to get stronger. I think that's one of the fabulous things of this New Year forecast. But I want to tell you about the point between the Moon at 15 degrees in Sagittarius and the Sun at 10 degrees Capricorn. And that's known as the Sun-Moon midpoint. And that's actually exactly 28 degrees in Sagittarius. So it's pointing towards, despite that Capricorn stellium, a very Sagittarius year. Even though we've got the switch into the solar and lunar eclipse series from Sagittarius. We had the last total Sagittarius eclipse on the 4th of December, so that's still going to provide an overlap for the first 5.5 months of 2022. So that points towards the desire to travel a lot more, totally understandably, because of all that restriction that we've experienced. But I think this midpoint is particularly interesting because it's alongside a fixed star called Etemin. Now, Etemin is actually quite neutral, but it's a balance of Mars and the Moon, but it can bring dishonour. And I think this issue with Venus parked alongside Pluto in retrograde as this year begins in the sign of status, it suggests my prediction about corruption coming more to the fore in public office particularly is going to be a big theme. Now, what we have in society really is a lack of accountability. If an ordinary citizen walks along a high street and does something illegal, you know, for example, walk into a shop and steal a bottle of whiskey, the chances are they're going to get punished for it quite quickly. The problem with power, which is what the sign of Capricorn represents, and Pluto being in Capricorn, power corrupts if we have too much power without accountability. And especially where charm is used, or it's all to do with the old boy network, you know, Venus, it's who you know, not what you know, that all that stuff's going to be strongly challenged this year. And the thing with Sagittarius energy, with that midpoint being conjunct the fixed star of Etemin, and the Moon and Mars being there in the third house, that's going to ask questions. It's going to hold people much more to account. So I think we're going to see much more of a theme of that emerging. Now, the other thing you can see about this chart is that Saturn is squaring Uranus again. Now, that became exact on Christmas Eve. It was the third pass. By the end of February, that aspect does come to a close, but because it was the most dominant aspect of 2021, it is still going to be there as a background energy throughout this year. So what's that about? Well, I think it's more to do with social discontent, more protests on the street, more people pushing back about what they feel is unjust use of power, which Saturn, of course, is the ruler of Capricorn. But in the sign of Aquarius, where it's the co-regent, it's much more about humanity. It's much more about how things affect us all. But it is in the fourth house. So I think our home emotional security is going to be a massive issue this year. And I think it's possible, because Uranus is in the 8th house, there is going to be some inflation linked to property. That's almost definite. We've had historically low interest rates for quite a long time. I think that's going to change this year. There is going to be an increase. In a more personal context, Uranus being in the sign of Taurus in the 8th house is very much to do with things like mining. 8th, dive deep. You're getting down beneath the surface. Uranus is actually exalted in Scorpio, which is an 8th house influence, if you like. But in the sign of Taurus, of course, it's not. It's in its fall. So the continual use of resources without thinking about the impact using those resources is going to be a continually massive talking point throughout the year. And we can keep kind of burying our heads in the sand and thinking that we want to have all the consumer goods whenever we want, but if we can cut down on things like the amount of clothes that we use, we buy better quality clothes that last longer, we become much more aware of microfibers, much more aware of plastics, stripping down the goods we do use, separating things. I know there's a big debate that whenever we recycle things, particularly in Britain, it doesn't always actually get then recycled properly further up the food chain and can then be shipped to other developing nations, which is disgusting. So all these things definitely need to be looked at. But I think Saturn in Aquarius is telling us to take responsibility as an individual in how it connects to other people. So we can all work a bit harder at turning lights off, wearing more clothes to keep warmer, keeping the central heating down or off where possible, just working at those things. And I think it's true to say that raw energy is going to continue to cost more this year. So we may as well get used to this change. So it's going to be an increase in cost. I feel the cost of borrowing money, the cost of using raw resources, that means consumer goods are going to go up. So the way we can counteract this is consume less, have a simpler life, more based on humanity, on social interaction and the emotional benefits of being close to people. Now you can see in this chart that Chiron, the wounded healer, is in Aries, where it struggles to find its identity. And a lot of people have Chiron in Aries because Chiron has a very, very odd ecliptic. But the fact that it's right on that 7th house cusp tells us that it's the opposite point of the ascendant, which is asking us to relate to people skillfully. Well, it's saying if we can work on wounded relationships this year, that's a very smart thing to do. The North Node is, as you know, I mentioned it before, going to be reversing back into the sign of Taurus for the first time in 18 years on the 18th of January. But you can see on this chart it's squaring up with Jupiter. Now Jupiter is back into the second of the signs that it governs. Of course, it had a brief sojourn through the sign of Pisces last year, and it returned to the sign of Pisces in the last 3 days of the year. So if you're someone who's got any early planets in Pisces, that's lovely for you, because you're really going to have some uplift this year with having Jupiter apart on that point or those points in your natal chart. But you can see that in this particular chart, Jupiter's in the 5th house, which is very joyful. We'll take some of that, and it's also forging a fantastic link with the path of fortune in the sign of Scorpio. So path of fortune in Scorpio points towards being canny with resources. Jupiter in Pisces is about being more spiritual, about how we connect to other people, and more creative. So Pisces energy is great for painting, for photography, for filmmaking, for crafting. All of those things can be really uplifted by that wonderful link with the position of the path of fortune. But we do have a square with Jupiter and the North Node. And I think it just means that the North Node is like the societal direction of travel. So as it's been going through the sign of Gemini the last year and a half, as I mentioned before, very much about the fight for communication, the battle for knowledge, the distortion that's gone on. We know that sometimes what we're served up on certain social media platforms that we use is based on our interests, and we're being denied a view of the things that they feel are not actually the things we're interested in. So there's all sorts of manipulation of data going on. We all know that. It's way beyond government. This is big technology. Big technology has had a lot of control for a very long time. Due to automation and artificial intelligence, it's getting ever more sophisticated. But I think this particular square is just saying that we can still have those philosophical battles in 2022. But I think we're going to be asked to get more gritty and more earthy and more factual about our points of view once the North Node moves on the 18th and we have the series of eclipses between Taurus and Scorpio that are going to go on this year. For sure we're going to have Mars in Gemini later in the year from August, and that is going to create the opportunity for those exchange of ideas in a more vibrant way. But we do have Mars in the third house on Moon at the start of this year, remember that. So a lot more activity in our communities. There can still be those philosophical discussions. There's going to be the downfall of people who've abused power. I feel that corruption in public office is going to come more to the fore. I feel that there is going to be an increase in the cost of energy prices and the cost of borrowing. I do feel that we have an opportunity to move around more, but we have to move around with responsibility. So obviously with Mars being on the Moon and the midpoint all being in Sagittarius and being conjunct Etemin, which I have to say is brilliant for astrology and philosophy. So if your journey is much more spiritual, then I think that this can be a very positive year. But using resources wisely is a big part of our journey this year, and also not being transfixed by material resources in any kind of emotional or romantic relationship. It's good to be secure, but the most wonderful security comes from feeling safe with someone when you've really not got those physical benefits so much. It's that you can really rely and trust upon that other person. Not easy to find, but that's something that we can attain or reach out to and look for with Chiron on the 7th house curse. Now, the other thing that year 2022 is going to bring rich promise around is going to be technology. With the Sun at 10 degrees in Capricorn and Uranus at 10 degrees in Taurus, the relationship between the two, both earth signs, is almost perfect in terms of an astrological angle called a trine. Now, this is a very enabling aspect. So although Saturn is challenging Uranus, suggesting that us as a collective can be resisting some of the changes we need to make around consumption, the fact that the Sun in Capricorn is in such an enhancing and uplifting angle to Uranus suggests that there can be physical changes unfolding that we can feel much more optimistic about. So that could be different strategies that are going to be developed, different very high-tech technologies to do with pushing back against global warming, for example. But I think the growth of electric cars is almost certain to increase apace. But it won't be just that. There's going to be lots of different technologies, but it's going to be technologies that have a practical and immediate benefit, because being earth signs, what we're looking for is some kind of tangible reward. So we're not talking about something that's quite airy-fairy and down the track, even though Uranus can be very much future orientated. I think we're talking about how we can learn to push back against some of the man-made damage that we've made, and some of those newer and very innovative technologies are going to be central to that. And that could also include anything to do with medicines as well. So I hope that gives you a flavour of what we can expect this year. Please stay with me for your individual zodiac sign forecast, which, as I said before, you can watch in terms of your sun or your ascendant. But I hope you have a great year, and please stay with me for more. So Aries, your year 2022 solar return points towards the potential to travel, to engage with the world in a very vivid way. Having Mars, your ruling planet, on the moon in Sagittarius, your 9th house, and that midpoint, and Itamin, the fixed star, all in the 9th house, suggests you're going to want to investigate something quite thoroughly over the next 12 months. But because you have that collection of energy still in Capricorn, what you do for a living, where you work, who you work with, your goals and ambitions in general, anything to do with property, status and standing are going to continue to be big themes for you. But Saturn's the clue. Saturn's in the part of your situation to do with your longer term philosophy. Saturn can be restrictive, but it can also remind you that if you're pursuing something that's not ultimately going to be feeling good for you, it could end up being an empty victory. So it's square with Uranus in your sector of everyday resources. It's just saying, be careful what you wish for. You can make strides in the material world with all that collective of energy in Capricorn, but it has to feel right. There has to be a sense of truthfulness about all of it because of so much energy being located in Aquarius and also in Sagittarius, because they're very much concerned with the deeper meaning of our life direction, whereas Capricorn is the brass tacks, it's the physical plane. So the physical plane is going to be important this year, but with having Jupiter having moved to join Neptune in your 12th house, I think discovering that deeper meaning is going to be something of a journey. Now, of course, Jupiter is going to go into your sign later this year, and you are going to have the North Node reverse into your 2nd house along with those eclipses. So there is going to be a lot of discussion this year about resources, but I feel that Jupiter initially, and particularly on this solar return being in Pisces, is just saying don't only be guided by the physical plane. So nothing wrong with earning money, nothing wrong with status, nothing wrong with working hard, but it must all feel meaningful. And if you're doing something or pursuing something that feels a bit empty, it may give you greater physical security, but it's not really switching you on and giving you a sense of passion, which is so important for your sign, then do think again. And Jupiter being in the 12th house and forging that link with the North Node suggests that you could tune into sources of information. There could be some spiritual advisor that really becomes more meaningful for you over the next year. But it's always most important for all of us to listen to our inner voice, our gut feeling. And you can be actually far better at that than people give you credit for. Aries people have a reputation of rushing in, initiating things, and then getting bored. I actually think it's profoundly unfair. What Aries people are very good at is listening to their gut and then making decisive moves quickly to pursue those opportunities, while other people are still humming and hawing, sat on the wall, really not being able to make their mind up. Aries will go for it. Now, obviously, sometimes things don't work out for you. That's life. We don't always get it right, but at least you will be decisive. But I think your decisiveness this year does need to be tempered with a real strong awareness of your deeper philosophies about life. So good to go for those physical goals, but really test out, ask yourself some firm questions about what your motives are, and that's going to keep you straight throughout the year. And I do feel that it is going to be important to balance the books this year. That is going to be an important part of the theme, but a lot of excitement for you. And most of all, I think if you can in some ways shake things up and escape some of the restriction of the last few years as early as possible in this new year, it's going to be very good for your soul. Now, Taurus, welcome to your year 2022 forecast. So exciting what's happening for you this year. There's going to be a lot bigger chance for you to define your individuality. Now, you may feel that you've been pushed really out of your comfort zone in recent years by the role of Uranus and having that collective of energy in Capricorn. And guess what? You got it again on this solar return, because you got your ruler Venus and also Mercury co-aligning with Pluto and the Sun in your 9th house. So change seems to be inevitable for you again this year, and you're probably the least availing sign to accepting change. But I think you've had some practice in recent years, so you're being pushed to continue to probe about how you can reform things. And this chart, because for you it's very, very strong in your 8th solar house, points towards business, it points towards money, it points towards using your natural shrewdness and wisdom around resources in a canny way. But it may mean doing some things different. And so, we live in such a fast changing world. If we want to just stay within our own very tight domain of activity, we're going to miss out on opportunities. So I would step forwards, step into the light. You can be so talented. Jupiter's helping you fantastically. It's moved into your sector of the future. It can make you much more optimistic at the turn of this year. Really lovely to go for. For sure, Saturn's at the top of your chart. It's saying you could take on new responsibilities and obligations, but it is squaring with Uranus in your sign. Some of that may feel uncomfortable. None of us gets all of what we want all of the time. All of it's a bit of a juggling act all of the time. And I feel generally for you, this is an exciting, dramatic solar return for you. And knowing the North Node is advancing towards your sign, and that you are going to have a solar eclipse in your sign, and a solar eclipse in your sector of relating, year 2022 offers a lot of rich promise for you, but you have to take the initiative. So sticking rather than twisting, sticking rather than any kind of twisting is really not going to be giving you a refreshment of your senses in the way that it could. So I think the chance for you really is to try to think and visualize how things could be. Take love, for example. Your ruler Venus is in a gorgeous sextile with Neptune at the turn of this year. True love could come to you, particularly on the back of that Scorpio solar eclipse in the second half of this year, but you have to create the conditions for it to happen. So it's about being a bit bolder and consolidating some of the changes you have made in recent years, but you can continue to move forwards, and you're going to get a lot of planetary support this year. So be very assured that the planetary wind is definitely going to be in your sails. Gemini, welcome to your year 2022 forecast. Now, of course, the North Node is about to move out of your sign, but it's still with you at the turn of this year, and it is forging a link with Jupiter, and Jupiter's in your sector of work and career. Maybe it's your instincts about where you want to go with your career and your work are what you should really be listening to, because with Jupiter high in the sky like that, it may be that just by having the confidence to take one giant leap forwards, it could trigger a whole chain of events which could have very significant circumstances for you. Now, I think that year 2022 could turn out to be very hot, and I'm going to use this word very carefully, very hot and horny for some Geminis. It just depends on you, because having Venus combining with Pluto at the turn of the year in your 8th solar house, it's hot, hot, hot. But also it points towards the potential for things to break down, because Pluto is about transformations, where a relationship has been too possessive or based on jealousy or control or manipulation, the dark arts. If you're in the grip of something that's very compulsive but doesn't feed your soul, the fact that the solar return has all that 8th house energy is not going to offset completely the fact that the midpoint, the position of the moon and also Mars in a conjunction in the 3rd house of the actual event chart, is very Gemini. So a lot of conversation is possible this year, but for you, this is your sector of relationships. So relationships are going to be very important to you this year, but I think your journey or direction of travel is still towards learning to integrate the energy that Uranus has been provoking over the last few years. So if your nerves have been bad, you've had anxiety, you felt very unsettled, it's been hard to sleep, then the way to counter that is to integrate the shadow side of your nature. So the more spiritual side of your being, the part of you that maybe you're not so comfortable with. Owning ourselves is a very powerful process, because once we do it and we no longer judge any part of our being, we become so joined up, we become really cohesive, holistic in our whole soul. The balance between our physicality and our emotionality is total. So if you've achieved that, you're really going to thrive this year. If you're still struggling with that, it may be because there's some part of your personality that you're struggling to perhaps be at ease with. So I feel that there is some challenges still with Uranus in your 12th house. You're going to have the North Node there from the 18th of January. And you're also going to have a couple of eclipses. So the choice is yours. Relationships can definitely go forwards. They could be very sexual if you're fortunate. But I think for things to really progress around any kind of relationship, business or personal, it's about you becoming more in tune with the emotional side of life. That's the lesson of year 2022. But I do think if you're single, someone really exciting can be propelled into the heart of your universe, and it can be extremely uplifting and exciting for you. Now, Cancer. Of course, you've got a stellium of energy in the sign of Capricorn in your 7th house, so that's relationships. But the collection of energy in Sagittarius is very much to do with practicalities, health and healing, the order of your life. Now, you may pride yourself at being very, very ordered and meticulous in your approach. That's good. You know, it's something I personally struggle with. And one of my vowed aims in 2022, because my draconic midpoint is 0 degrees Cancer, and I also have the moon in Cancer as well in my draconic chart, and I have a lot of 4th house in my natal chart. So a very Cancerian person. I love home, you know, I'm quite sensitive, I'm very caring, and so for me this chart is great for trying to get it together in terms of, you know, my accounts, my bookkeeping, you know, getting to bed early, you know, getting everything routine working well. Now, if that's your gift, I think this year points towards perhaps some changes around your work or where you help others. The 6th house can be very much about assisting others, where this Sagittarius energy is. Could also point towards getting a pet this year, which could be exciting. So your new emotional relationship driven by Venus's conjunction with Pluto could be a deeply devoted tie to a pet. So that's lovely. And you also have Jupiter, the planet of expansion, in its home zone at the start of this year of Pisces, which shares your water triplicity. So that's really, really lovely, because that's about travel, it's about expansion. But Saturn still is in the 8th house, and it is squaring up with Uranus, which for you is in the 11th house of being more aware of the plight of personkind. So the 8th house is very much to do with your physical resources and business, and perhaps also where you share things very closely with someone else. Now, that could be a business partnership, could be a personal partnership. I think that Uranus is saying to you, are you hanging on in a physical situation because it just gives you the physical security? So really a reflection of what we're all going to be going through this year. But for you, the intensity around the relationship is extraordinarily strong. So I think there are going to be some big decisions to be made about relationships this year, particularly with the North Node moving into your 11th house of friendship. We're having 2 eclipses in the 11th of friendship and the group, and 2 in the 5th house in Scorpio, which is you, what you desire and crave in terms of fulfilling your deepest romantic or creative needs. So I don't think it's just going to be the solar eclipse which is really pushing you to think very carefully about how you connect to others. So if you're in a relationship which is as stale as a pair of old slippers, you could be thinking about it this year, about whether at the very least it needs a major upgrade. And of course, with Venus being on Pluto in the 7th house, anything to do with the imbalance of power, you know, if you're in a tie where you get your own way all the time, well, yeah, that might be okay. Is it really that gratifying? Or if you're in a tie where the other person always seems to want to get their own way over you, that's totally unacceptable. So these are some of the big questions that you could be asked this year. But I think if you're single, there's a huge opportunity for you to meet somebody new, and it can be a delightful year, a much more social year for you. You know, having the North Node go through your sign up until a year and a half ago was a deeply cathartic event, and obviously all the planets moving through Capricorn as they have since Pluto arrived in 2008 has really taken some people out of your life in a big way. You know, there's been some big politics around relationships, and I think there could be some more this year, but I think there's the potential for some upsides on it, people coming in who are very, very good for you. But I think if you are in a relationship which is deeply unbalanced in terms of what you give and get, then try to at least improve that within the circumstances you're in as best you can. Now, Leo, your year 2022 forecast. Now, having that cluster of energy in Sagittarius is fantastic for you because this is the 5th house. So this is about being bright, upbeat, positive, optimistic. Because guess what? The 5th house is very redolent of your zodiac sign. The sun governs the sign of Leo. So having the midpoint in your personal 5th house, and also Mars, which is a planet that is one of the rulers of the 3 sections, the decan of Leo, so the 3rd decan. So you have an opportunity to shake things up, but because there's such a lot of energy in the 6th house and you've got Uranus in your 10th house, I think changes around work, duties, life role are all in store for you, but you need to be enjoying whatever you're doing. If you're not enjoying it, you need to change it. And with Saturn in your 7th house of relating, and now that Jupiter's gone, it just depends where your sun is and where your planets are in Leo. So if you're anything from about the 8th day into Leo onwards, you're going to feel the force of Saturn much greater this year. If you're later on than that, it's going to be year 2023 that you really feel the force in terms of your sun. Now, of course, you could have Venus and Mercury in Leo. They're often very close to the sun, and so they may have been contacted by Saturn already. So some big lessons about relationships are still in the works, but particularly professional relationships. You need to be doing something that gives you a sense of self-worth and satisfaction, not just for what you do, but how you help others. And as I say, it must be fun. So that's the critical factor. And with the North Node moving to your 10th house and the 2 eclipses in your 10th house and 2 in your 4th, this year is going to be trying to get a balance between work and home. So that's going to be the theme for the year, but I think you're going to want to reform your basic structures in a fun way, and a change of work is entirely possible, and relationships do continue to need to be worked at. Virgo, welcome to your year 2022 forecast. Of course, having a cluster of energy in the sign of Sagittarius, that's about home, emotion, family. Having all that energy in Capricorn for you is fantastic, because that's all about being much more daring and risk-taking. Now the sun is forging an amazing trine to Uranus, so a change can be very, very good for you this year, very, very liberating. If you're single, I think a travel event or education or technology can be hints of how you can connect with somebody new in a very exciting way. Also, Jupiter is joined up with Neptune in your 7th house of relating. Another very, very helpful development. Now, when Jupiter moves into Aries, as it will later this year, it's also going to go into your 8th house, which is much more to do with sex and devotion. So in general, this can be a very important year for where you live, who you live with, and how you live there, but also romantically too. And I think there's going to be a lot of interaction of ideas. You're really going to have a very, very lively year, I'd say, Virgo. Now, Libra, your year 2022 is really fascinatingly poised. You know that. Since 2008, there's been an enormous amount of change around where you live, who you live with, how you live there, the emotional dynamics within your family unit. I think that's been something that's been very telling amongst Libran or Libran ascendant people. And because Venus is the ruler of Libra, and this particular event chart in the United Kingdom is also Libran, I think this surprising thing that this year can bring is some healing. Now, that healing may not be with some of the people who've been so corrosive to your peace of mind over recent years, but the healing may come from your relationship with yourself, or it could come from where you live, which can change, or it could come from adding to your family. So whether that's you personally or people younger than you having additions, that can bring a lot of joy too. But some kind of transition around where you live, how you live, and who you live with continues to be an important theme for this year. And so does also money. Now, because you're an air signs can be a little bit sniffy about talking about money. I don't think that's necessarily true of you. You love a bit of lush, and, you know, having some spare cash to spend out on the really classy items that catch your or take your fancy is something that you're going to really appreciate, especially if it is to do with home decoration. But it could also be to do with how you personally dress, because of having Libra on the 1st house of this event chart. I think generally that's really, really good for you. Jupiter has also moved back into the 6th house. Neptune's been causing more mischief for you than I think a lot of astrologers have recognised. It's been there since 2012 in Pisces, the 6th house, and it has seen you bending over backwards to support and help others, but you may not have felt at times that you were getting it back. And I think Jupiter moving into this location means that any giving you do, certainly until it transits into your 7th house of relating, is going to be an opportunity to get a lot from that yourself. So that can be very, very enriching. You do have Saturn still in your 5th house of romance, and it is squaring up to Uranus still in your 8th house of devotion. What does this mean? I think it means about relationships that you're in at the moment that feel very locked in and restrictive and are not very joyful. There's going to continue to be a lot of tension until you make the decision to be more assertive. If it really does feel that the other person doesn't tune into you in a way that a Libran needs. Librans can be so attentive to others. If you're not getting any of that back from another person, the relationship leaves you feeling absolutely worthless. And so that's a pointer for you. Now, of course, later this year, Jupiter is going to move into your 7th house, and that could point towards a new start in a relationship. And the cluster of energy in Sagittarius means that your mind's going to be very fertile. There's going to be a lot of communication. There could be communication with a sibling that there's been some kind of separation from, but I don't want to guarantee this. Venus is in retrograde. Maybe your relationship to the separation that already happened is just going to change. You're going to become more at peace with the change. Your own philosophies have strengthened hugely. You've been tested like no other zodiac sign, I feel, in recent years. And this is going to be definitely a year when you can move forwards. But I think there are going to be echoes of recent years. It's not going to be like the minute you wake up on the 1st of January, it's all completely new and different. It's going to be a process. rather than a one-off event. But there is the opportunity for you to feel lively, optimistic. I think you know yourself so much better. You've asserted your boundaries so much more forcefully, so much more assertively, which hasn't always been easy for you because you're such a people pleaser. And there is a chance with the eclipses coming this year that you are going to transform your physical world as well. There are going to be improvements, and you know, it could be that there may be an inheritance that's going to come to you this year, which will be very, very helpful to you. But obviously with inheritances sometimes come loss. So having Venus next to Pluto does point towards the potential for some people to leave your life, but definitely others to come in. It could mean fractures in a romantic relationship that just isn't giving you anything you need, or it could mean that you are going to finally move on from hurtful family dynamics which are never going to get solved unless the other people go through a profound transformation. Which brings us to Scorpio, your year 2022 forecast. Well, one of the things I love about this forecast for you is that having your ruler in the second solar house is going to give you a desire to improve your financial lot. You know that you're going to have a solar eclipse in your sign later this year, and you know that there's going to be one in Taurus in the spring, in the northern hemisphere, the autumn in the southern. So that means that a relationship situation can start to resolve itself from then. You are being asked, with the North Node moving into your 7th house, to think about relationships carefully. If you're in a relationship where you feel very trapped emotionally and it's dull, then that's going to continue to challenge you. There can be lots of flirty stuff going on this year. Your words can carry a lot more weight. If you're single, somebody introduced through your family or through someone in your neighborhood or a community situation, or even through technology, can prove to be a very fated individual for you. There's also a glorious link between the Sun and Uranus, of course, so some kind of electric connection is the pointer to the type of relationship that will really give you uplift. But I think with Saturn in your 4th house, you've got to just be aware of how things feel. I'm not saying that you're not ordinarily, you're probably very aware of how things feel, but I don't think your life can be ruled totally by fearfulness. Saturn in the 4th house is asking you how much fear is manifesting itself, not just around relationships, but around manifesting your talents, about breaking out of conditioning which is stopping you really thriving. So this chart gives you a wonderful opportunity to thrive, because your ruling planets of Pluto and Mars are so magnificently amplified. In the case of Pluto by Mercury, in the case of Mars by the Moon. So you have a lot to offer this year, but I think it's all about how it feels around those relationships. But a big relationship change is coming, or is it the relationship with yourself where you have to start being much more individualistic than perhaps you've been thus far? Sagittarius, here is your year 2022 forecast. Having that cluster of energy in your sign, the midpoint, is glorious. The Moon conjunct Mars. Yes, it is potentially a little bit over vibrant in some ways. The Mars influence on the Moon could make you very desirous of wanting immediate changes to your home and emotional life. So it could be a touch of impatience washing around, but your financial position can be hugely transformed this year. And as long as you're doing it in a straight up way, good for you, go for it. Your ruler Jupiter also moves into your 4th house. That's been an area of confusion since 2012, but maybe as you're going to get hitched to someone, you're going to decide to have a child, maybe you're going to start a home-based business. Jupiter into Pisces is very nice, thank you very much. What does Saturn square Uranus mean for you? Tension. Watch your nerves. It's important to get to bed earlier, to take extra vitamins and minerals where needed, to make sure that your nutrition is really up to scratch. Uranus in the 6th. to do a job that pleases you, that is not so dull that it's starving you of joy. And it's just saying try to get as fit as you can without overdoing it. But generally speaking, a very, very positive year for you. And yes, you have got the eclipses coming in across the 6th and 12th houses, but you've also got Mars coming in your 7th house later this year. There could be someone arriving in your life from August who has a very dramatic impact on your existence. Capricorn, welcome to your year 2022 forecast. Having such an amazing clustering of energies in your sign, it's quite a thing, isn't it? Especially Venus. So that's saying to you, how do you feel about your personal appearance? Do you feel good about it? Do you feel it could be changed in any way? Do you feel that you're attracting people to you in the way you want? Well, if you want to attract people to you, you've got very little problem in year 2022. You've got so many good things coming in for you this year. What's not to like? You've got Venus on Pluto. You've got the Sun in a wonderful trine with Uranus. Electric connections. Socially can be bright with the North Node moving into the 5th. Can be great for children. You've got 2 eclipses in the 5th, 2 in the 11th. You're going to be so popular this year. It's going to be very, very busy. What's not to like? Well, it's about trust. So you need to have people in your life you can absolutely totally rely upon. So with that midpoint, the Moon and Mars in your 12th house, have a clear out of anyone who doesn't serve your greater good. If you're focusing on people who really feed your soul, this can be a great year for you. Aquarius. Now obviously your 2 ruling planets are still in mortal combat at the turn of this year, and it means that for this solar return, but also the solar return for every single day of the 30 days of Aquarius, Saturn is going to be square Uranus. So it's going to affect all of us Aquarius is people, that square. But what I would say with that square, this is the 3rd and final pass. What have you learnt from it? I've learnt that, it's very much about where I live. And if where you live isn't right, you have to change it. So that was the big lesson for me. And that might be a lesson that would unfold for you in 22. But maybe also it's something to do with family and close associations. Maybe you're shocking and awing some people close to you by being much more authentic about the person you really are. You do have a glorious collection of energy in Sagittarius, which is about friendship, but also a massive cluster of energy in the 12th house, which is about deep emotional and spiritual transformations. I mean, Mercury is very, very close to the 1st degree of Aquarius. So it is conjunct. It's just disassociately conjunct because it's not in Aquarius. So what I'm feeling for you is that there's still some work to be done on the spiritual side of things, the letting go of those associations and ties that don't work for you. But financially, Jupiter moving into your 2nd solar house as the year comes to a close, that's great. Going to be some extra money coming. There's going to be some change about where you live with the North Node and 2 eclipses in Taurus. And there's going to be changes around work as well. Your life's going to change in quite a radical way this year. But I think it's letting go of some of the past strands that aren't working for you. Don't fight for it. I think if you're anything like me, you hate to lose any kind of relationship that's been good for you at some point in your life. But it is possible with Venus conjunct Pluto, somebody could come back or want to come back. But equally possible, it could be that it's the final separation, Venus retrograde conjunct Pluto, of something that isn't working. So if you're in a love affair particularly, and there's been some betrayal or lack of trust, get out of it. Think about your future. That's what all that Sagittarius energy is saying. Be more future orientated. The fact that we have Etemen, the fixed star, on the midpoint, really emphasizing the benefits of astrology and philosophical interest. Your Aquarius is the sign of astrology. The ruler of astrology, or the ruler of the sky, is Uranus. Some astrologers argue it's Mercury, but then that's exalted in Aquarius. I've even read one astrologer said Neptune was the ruler of astrology. For me, it's Uranus. So have an opportunity to understand your emotional world by embracing astrology more. But that big clustering of energy in the 12th house, you know, it is tender. But the Sun does, to be fair, forge a great link with Uranus. So inspired thinking about home and family life, thinking outside the box, can work marvellously well. Which brings us to Pisces. Last, as always, but never least, because you are the accumulation of all the other zodiac signs' experiences. So you can, in your most highest form, be so wise. So what does this year hold for you? Well, it's obvious. The first standout thing is that Jupiter, your ruler, has returned to your sign. Now, of course, it's going to split its time this year between your sign and Aries. Great, you're going to get some money coming to you this year then. That's nice. Or feel better about yourself. Get busy with the ideas that are important to you. Jupiter doesn't work when we're passive. We have to be proactive. But it is forging a gorgeous link with both Venus and Pluto, but particularly Venus. That's the aspect of love. But the love for you could come when you take the initiative, but it could be through some network or group situation or friendship that you have an experience of somebody new that's exciting. The cluster of energy in Sagittarius is more about work. And it's kind of saying, because the moon's in this area, if you're not happy at any point this year, it's going to be incredibly difficult to disguise your feelings. Now, if you're someone with any Scorpio in your chart, you may be someone who likes to keep your cards close to your chest. This chart makes it difficult because Mars is alongside the moon in your 10th house. So your feelings are going to be quite vulnerable, perhaps even a little bit volatile at times. But, you know, if you're going for what's good for you about your long-term future, and that's what this cluster of energy in Capricorn is really urging you to do, it can be really exciting. It's going to be a lot of moving around this year. You need a lot of mental stimulation. It's just the biggest standout challenge for you has got to be Saturn in your 12th house. So it's kind of saying to you, the wounds or hurts or vulnerabilities or fears or anxieties or judgments that you have against yourself are going to continue to operate quite powerfully until you work to integrate them. So I think there's an opportunity here for you to keep working with Saturn. It can be very good for you. Your chart overwhelmingly is very positive. It's just about Saturn in the 12th house. So if you're not letting go of a past hurt, separation, pain, disappointment, unless it's something truly grievous, which does need some kind of resolution to in a legal and emotional context, if it's something where, you know, there are scrapes along the way in life, we don't get it all our own way. If there's something that you're hanging on to from years ago to do with a separation, and Pisces people can be incredibly sentimental and incredibly welded to the past. Do you know, it's true of all mutable signs, can be very nostalgic, particularly you, because you're watery as well, and because Neptune is very much to do with dreams and your imagination. You're very sensitive, and I think Saturn's just urging you really to try to cut the chains of those hurts, come to terms with them, and then you have a fantastic opportunity to move forwards in a really dynamic way this year. Now, please remember, you can watch your in-depth, detailed horoscope forecast for year 2022 by seeing the link beneath this video. But for now, stay safe, take care, and have a great year 2022.